apologies for the delay that we've just had. We appear to have had a couple of challenges with technology. I'm glad I wasn't sorting it out. Technology is not my strong point. However, welcome. So today, as you know, we started this a month ago, where it was me saying I'm going to have conversations with amazing people. And the first one last month was, of course, my amazing younger daughter, which was kind of interesting because she was endeavoring to interview me at the same time as me interviewing her, which was quite good fun. However, this time there's somebody that I'm delighted to introduce you to, who is the lovely Chris Weston. I was trying to work it out, actually. I think it's about 25 years, Chris, isn't it? It's something quite terrifying. Anyway, it's been a long time.
It has been.
So I'm not going to spend time telling you about him. I'm going to ask Chris, first of all, to tell you a bit about him, where he's come from, and how he began his whole leadership journey. So, Chris, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Penny. Lovely to see you. I'm glad we've overcome the technology issues. So maybe very briefly, a little bit about me. I left school at 18. I didn't have any A levels. I'd had more fun at school than working. I joined the army, and I was in the army for 7 years. So I suppose that was really my first leadership experience. I left there after 7 years, not knowing what to do, but actually ended up doing a PhD at Imperial College in something called combinatorial optimization, which now I have to say completely, I don't understand it at all. So, but I did at the time. I then got my first proper job in cable and wireless, and I worked in cable and wireless both in the UK and in Australia, which is where I had my first experience running a company. So having started in strategy and regulation, which I didn't think were really my strong points, I moved into running a very small internet startup for cable and wireless in Australia. Internet was very new, and I have to say I made many mistakes, and it was nice to be able to do it on something small rather than something more meaningful. I came back from Australia. I left cable and wireless. I went into a very small startup in the UK called OneTel, which grew extremely quickly. It was a telecoms company. But I have to say, eventually, we were forced to sell it to Centrica, which is how I got into energy. And I joined Centrica. I ran a company called British Gas Business, and then British Gas Services, mending people's boilers, which I have to say was absolutely phenomenal. What a wonderful company. Following that, I ran Direct Energy, which was their North American subsidiary, which probably had about 5 or 6 million customers. So I did that for 2 or 3 years before being asked to come back and join the main board at Centrica and to run everything downstream. So British Gas in the UK and Direct Energy in North America. I didn't get the role of CEO in Centrica, but I was headhunted and joined a Greco listed company providing power all over the world. Again, a fantastic company. And I joined them in 2015 and left about a year ago when we were bought by private equity and taken private. So I have run, I don't know, 7 or 8 different companies of different sizes in my career, and leadership happens to be a pet topic of mine. And I have to say, Penny and the Living Leader has been a great support throughout my career in developing my leadership and leadership capabilities in the companies that I have run. So that's a little bit about me, Penny. You can go wherever you like, as I know you will.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I want to ask you one thing. The thing that has always fascinated me is that you, whatever company you go into, you seem to create a scenario where if you then move to another company, virtually everybody in that team would follow you. If you pick up the phone, they want to go wherever you go. And I want to know what it is that you think you do as a leader that enables this right now. Because I know that if you do decide you want to take another CEO role, you can only have to pick up the phone to a few people and they're going to be there. Doesn't matter what job they're in, they're going to be there. What is it, Chris, that you think causes them to want to follow you? What is it you do?
Well, I suppose it is my approach to running companies. And not everyone agrees with it. So contrary to what you say, Penny, there will be some who won't follow me, largely because I probably removed them when I moved into a company. But I remember, and you might have heard me talk about this in the past, but I suppose my first major, or the first big company I ran, was British Gas Business. And I remember hearing a lady being interviewed on the radio about how she approached running a company, and it stuck with me ever since then. And she said there are three things you need to get right. One is around people, two is around customers and how you look after them, and three is around the numbers and the finances. So that's all very simple. Of course, the detail is a lot more difficult. And the first of those, to me, is the most important, getting the people bit right. That's getting the culture right in a company. And that all stems from leadership and your leadership style. And I very much believe in being a leader, you have to be supportive of the team that you select. So select your individuals, bring them into your team, make them into a high performing team. And the way you do that is by support and trust, and that frightening word, inspiring people. And I like to hire people who I believe are very capable, and I will let them get on and do their job. And I will only intervene if necessary, and I'll try and leave them alone to do their job. And maybe it's that autonomy, that responsibility, that sense of accountability that people like. And also the fact that my most important job is creating that team. And I suppose those are some of the things they probably respond to, and why people who have been successful working for me might want to work for me again in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you talk very comfortably about creating a team. And it's one of the things that I think, in my experience, and I've, as you know, worked with a lot of different companies. And the thing I found really interesting is that, say I get a top team coming along wanting to do a program. And what I observe very quickly is they're not a team. They're a group of very bright individuals who are doing a darn good job wherever they are, but they're not actually a team. Now, it's a bit of a dilemma in a way. What you're talking about is you're saying how important it is that you leave people alone to do their job. You hire the best, trust them to do it. But that's almost half of it. But how do you actually then change them from a bunch of successful individuals actually into a high performing team? Because I think that really needs almost a different skill set to do that.
Yeah, I think I suppose it's all part of leadership. I mean, I'm sure we'll go into leadership in more detail, but for me, how do you create a high performing team? You have to have that bond in a team where they utterly trust each other. It's not superficial trust. They utterly trust each other and can talk to each other, can discuss with each other pretty much anything. And of course, you have to have things like a common agenda, and you have to have clear accountabilities. But at the end of the day, they're all people, and you have to build a bond between those people. They have to understand each other at a fundamental level and trust each other. And to do that, they have to know each other very, very well. And you can go through, the exercise that you do as part of the Living Leader of the introduction, where you introduce yourself to each other in the team, I think is a very, very good start in doing that, because you are helping people understand more about you and what makes you tick. And if you introduce yourself to a team in that manner, they start to understand you. I do think, though, it does take a bit of time, but you have to, that team, those individuals, to make them a high performing team, the most important thing is that group of individuals going through a moment of stress together, where you might have all sorts of emotions on show. And I think that grounds everyone, makes people understand that everyone in the team is human, and creates a fundamental trust that puts in place a foundation that serves you well into the future. And I've been in team meetings where, of course, people have got upset, but more importantly, people have shown how much they care about things, and that might often involve people crying, being very emotional, and showing that level of vulnerability helps build trust. And I think if you can create that situation as a leader, if you can create that level of trust, then you will end up with a high performing team. It might manifest itself in financial results. I have no doubt in the long term it would, but it will see you through anything if you can create that kind of trust within a team.
Well, the way you talk about it, I then have to ask myself, how many teams have I worked in when I've actually observed that? And sadly, I'm afraid I think they're few and far between. Chris, what do you do if you go and take in, let's say you step into a new CEO role and you're passionate about a leadership culture? And I will ask you further down, what do you think defines leadership as opposed to management or anything else? But you go in and you see again that you've got individuals who are delivering in whatever area it happens to be. It doesn't matter if it's marketing or sales or manufacturing or finance, but you've got some of the people who are doing it totally countercultural to the way you want to do it, which almost certainly means that they're suppressing the talent of the people underneath, suppressing ideas that are coming up, all of those things. How do you actually approach that when you go into that situation?
Well, you have to remove them. It's that simple. It's not that simple to do, but that is the answer. If you as a leader, if you think culture is important and you think leadership is important, then you can't have people within your team who will undermine that, undermine the importance of culture, will have leadership behaviors that are counter to that culture. It is going to, one, it's going to be undermining your authority, and two, it's going to be undermining the performance of the company. And you have to act on it. And I suppose because I've had a fair amount of experience now, you might be able to coach them and get them to change. And that is a viable route. It's not always possible, but at some point you will probably have to make a decision. Am I going to trust them and back them and get them to change, or am I going to have to remove them? And if they're not going to change, you have to remove them. And the quicker you do that, the better. As painful as it might be, the quicker you do it, the better.
Where has it worked for you and where has it not worked for you?
It's easier probably to give an example of where it hasn't worked for you, because I mean, I've had a number of times, and I think as I have gained more experience, it's one of the things I will act very quickly on now. And I think that enables you to build a high performing team more effectively. But in the past, I have had situations where, I mean, where you come across an individual in your team who you probably like as an individual, but you can see that their behaviors are disruptive. You can see at the same time, as you suggested, that they are delivering results. The problem I have found in the past where that has happened is that, as I said, it gets in the way of any cultural or behavioral type message you're getting into an organization. And as I said, there are three things you need to get right: people, customers, and the numbers. And if that first one you are undermining because of the way an individual behaves, it really detracts from all of the other messages you are putting into an organization. And there have been times in some of the companies that I have run, and I'm a little bit loath to say which ones, because they are individuals who did part company with the company I was running. But if you don't do it, not only does it send a message that you're not serious about culture or leadership behaviors, in time, if you are trying to deliver a strategy and they are behaving in a way that is countercultural, and maybe with a different view on that strategy, it will undermine the operations and financial performance of the company. And there was one instance where I didn't listen to my instinct. I left them in place for, I think, 9 months, and it took about a year to recover, a year beyond recruiting an individual into that role. And it did make life more stressful for everyone and much more difficult. And I've learned since then, and now I will react very quickly to an individual if they're not going to. If I don't believe I can develop them, then they've got to go immediately. It's not going to work.
Yeah, it is interesting because, as you know, somebody who's been a client similar to you for years, very much along those lines. He really felt he wanted to coach somebody and give them the best opportunity. And I've got to be honest, I did say to him at the beginning, I don't think this is going to work. And it was too long. And it was more painful as a result of it, because the individual could not then understand why he was basically given his cards. You know, you've worked with me, you've had me a coach, all of this, and couldn't understand it. So tell me, Chris, here's a one that I'd be really curious to know, because there's going to be a lot of people listening here who are not on the top team. How do you think, what behaviors and how do you think people who are a little bit further down the organization, maybe you're the second or the third layer down, but still pretty senior in a big company, and they've got bosses who are not living leadership principles, but are behaving very much like managers? What do you think that they can do if in an ideal world they'd like to stay in the company rather than just bugger off? But what do you think that they could do? How do you think they could handle it? What do you think they could say to their bosses? What are your thoughts about what they might be able to do to help shift the culture?
Yeah, it's quite tough, that situation, and I have been in that situation. I think you have to be true to yourself in the way that you behave. So if you are behaving in a way that I think is more inclusive, and that is different from the way your boss or your leader behaves, I mean, you might worry about your ambition and your ability to get on in the company, because that individual may not support you and promote you into other roles. But I would argue you're better off being true to yourself and continuing to lead and behave in a way that you believe in, that is you, that might be more inclusive than your bosses. And that's the only advice that you can give. I mean, I had a very bullying boss when I was relatively junior at the beginning of my career, in telecommunications and cable and wireless. And well, I've had it in a couple of times in cable and wireless. In one instance, I was very close to the individual, but I did have to stand my ground and quite bluntly tell him where to go on one or two occasions. And I think he respected that. We're not in touch now, but we did remain in touch for a long time. And he became very successful. He's been CEO and president of a company in North America for an awfully long time and been very successful. So it didn't hold him back. In another situation, I was equally as direct and blunt with a CEO. I told him what I thought of him, and that didn't turn out so well. And I had to move on and find another job. But I was true to myself, and I could look myself in the mirror and think, you know, I'm behaving in the right way. And it didn't hold my career back in the end. And I suppose, I mean, that would be the advice I would give you: be true to yourself. And at the end of the day, it might hold back your career, or you might have to change your job. But if you start to give away that fundamental belief in how you behave and conduct yourself, then I think you've gone wrong and you've lost your way.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. I mean, I am really curious because I've known you quite a while, and I'm very clear about what I think is one of your most powerful characteristics, and also what is some of your most amazing skills, which I find fascinating. But I'm not going to share it. I'm going to ask you, what do you think is one of the most important characteristics, or two or three, I don't mind, characteristics of being a great leader? And what do you think are some of the key skills that you have developed to such a really high level that's enabled you to be as successful as you are?
So I suppose the most fundamental question in that, I suppose, is what do I think leadership is? So to me, leadership is in most instances underestimated in its importance in an organization. I happen to think intellect is overestimated in its importance in an organization. Leadership is, of course, you have to set direction, and you have to set priorities, and you have to be able to communicate all of that to the organization. And those objectives, those priorities, that direction, it has to achieve whatever the objective is that needs to be achieved. And a leader can never lose sight of achieving what needs to be achieved. But all of that, to me, they are really hygiene factors. You can hire people to help you do that. If you're sensible, you'll get your team to help you to do that. To me, what's most important is the way you communicate it, and the way as a leader, and this is where leadership comes into its own, you give the people that you are working with the confidence to do more than they ever thought they could do. And that is, to me, that's leadership. And people talk about it as you inspire others to achieve these things. And maybe, I mean, I find that word inspire or inspirational leadership quite intimidating. And I suppose many people can translate it in many different ways. But at the end of the day, I think if you have inspired someone, they will have achieved more than they ever thought they could have achieved when you started out working with them. And you make them feel confident, you make them feel important, hopefully not too important, and there is a degree of humility there as well. And so that's what that bit around helping people become confident and achieve more than they ever thought they could, that is what true leadership is for me. Now, to do that, you have to recognize, I think, that as a leader, it's a position of privilege, and the people that work for you and work with you are far more important than you are as the leader. And you want to get the most out of them. So you have to think about how you do that. One is creating a team that they feel part of and they can work in. But also, I believe that if you are a leader that is always giving people answers and you are not listening to the people in your team, you're not seeking people's opinion, if you're not giving them the space to do what they need to do, then you're not going to be inspiring them, you're not going to be developing them, and ultimately you won't get the most out of your organization and the people that work in that organization. So a few things. Listening is important, giving other people credit is important, helping people develop is important. All of those types of things a leader needs to do. And you can ask yourself a very simple test. If you have a team meeting, think about the team meetings you've been in. Ask yourself, if you are the leader of that team, who does most of the talking in this organization, in this team meeting? And if it's you as the team leader, then you're probably going wrong. I found as a leader, I made very few decisions because I encouraged my team to make decisions. And absolutely in my team meetings, I probably said less than anyone else. That doesn't mean you're backing off. It doesn't mean you won't act where you need to act, but giving people the space to do what they need to do and encouraging them to do it is so important, as I believe, as a leader. Being emotional as a leader, and I don't mean shouting, not being afraid of showing what you care about, being human, showing a degree of humility, as well as being brave and decisive. I mean, those last two, everyone knows about. The former people are less certain about, but they are so important in helping a team and an individual grow in confidence. So I mean, Penny, you know, I have a favorite quote on leadership by a guy called Lao Tzu, who Chinese, lived a long time ago, and he talked about leadership in the following way. He said, as to the best leaders, people barely notice their existence. The next best, the people honor and praise. The next, the people fear. But when the best leader's work is done, the people say, we did it ourselves. And to me, that sums up leadership. I mean, to start off by saying, as to the best leaders, people barely notice their existence. I mean, that's an incredible comment, but it does show it's all about the people you have the privilege to lead. And that is what's most important. And if you can leave an organization at the end of the day and people believe in themselves and they believe it was all down to them, then that organization and those individuals will continue to perform. And that's what I aspire to. I don't get it right the whole time, but that's what I aspire to. That, to me, is what leadership is all about.
Absolutely fascinating, Chris. And I've observed you and worked with you for a long time. I do remember that when I very first met you, which, as I say, is about 25 years ago, and you were, I think your title was Managing Director of British Gas Business. It's a lot smaller that it became. And I can still remember when we first did the introductions, you were slightly horror struck. I think you couldn't understand quite why people needed to know so much about you. And I think that was when you really began to realize, God, this is what I'm learning about my team is amazing. And I think hopefully that's one of the things where we supported you on the journey. But I also then remember you've done this program so many times, you could probably deliver it yourself now. But I can so clearly remember that one that we did in America, which was absolutely fascinating. You'd got a new director who'd only recently joined, and you always knew that after I'd done my introduction that you needed to go first so that you could demonstrate to people you were prepared to be open. And I still remember that you got quite emotional because you were talking about, I think you'd been to watch one of your sons in the UK playing in either football or rugby match, and how thrilled he'd been when he saw you there. And you got quite emotional saying, you know, I've got 2 or 3 of my children over there and I'm missing them and I find it hard being away from them. I think only one child had come with you. And then everybody went. And, you know, I think this new guy who just joined thought, gosh, that was a bit unusual. And then I think the HR director went, and I think her mother was very ill. She got emotional. And then there was another guy whose friend had just died of cancer. He got emotional. And you could see this guy sitting there thinking, what the hell company have I joined? And he then went, and what he came out with was almost mind-blowing. And almost everybody sat there with their mouths open. And I remember, because, you know, I have a policy, I normally won't join a group for dinner. And I remember you saying, no, Pen, you're going to join us tonight. You're going to join us. But seeing how that team began to form as a team, that just in one day was absolutely amazing. And I think that began to create a foundation of trust. But without you kicking it off, it would never have happened. Would never have happened. The most senior person being able to say, this is who I am. And these are some of my personal challenges, as well as, you know, my work and everything else. And do you know the thing, and you know this to be true, I don't know any companies, unless they've worked with us, who actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody joins a company, they come in, and it's just, they're accepted. There's no discussion about where they've come from, who they are, nothing. And it can take years for them to really to get to know the individual. And then they only know what we describe as the persona. They don't necessarily know who's behind it. And and yet it can be scary. I'd like to share with everybody here what I perceive to be your most powerful characteristic. And I think it's the most powerful characteristic of leadership. And that is your courage to be authentic in any situation, you will be authentic. And what I see in organizations is people say, oh, yes, I will be. But at times it takes real courage to be authentic. It's much easier to try and pretend to be what you think your boss wants you to be or your team wants you to be rather than be authentic. And the other thing that you said, which I think is exceptional, is your ability to listen. And you are one of the best listeners I know. And having the ability to listen leads to so many other things. You know, they now find the opportunity to speak, come up with their ideas. They also think, wow, he's got faith in me because he's allowing me to come up with my idea. You know, it creates so much. So for me, those are your two, both characteristics and your most incredible skill, which is absolutely lovely. So tell me, Chris, if you were going to now decide that you, and I know you haven't decided if you really want to do it, you don't have to. Let's say that you really would like to now take on another role. What role would you ideally like to take on and why?
Well, first of all, Penny, it's very kind of you to say those things about me. I've told you how I view leadership, and that's what I aspire to. And if I get a little bit of the way there, then I'll take that. So that's very kind of you. I mean, I so many people ask me, do I want to go plural and do lots of non-exec roles? It doesn't really interest me at the moment. I love the two non-exec roles I do, one being in the Royal Navy, which is very special, and then one at Barratt Developments, which is more typically corporate and absolutely fascinating. I do enjoy leadership positions in companies. So I think my inclination would be to do another executive role, and typically it would have to be I suppose there are two things that I would look for. One is an interesting company, an interesting sector, something I can get excited about. And then maybe the most important is the people that I will be working with. And maybe I'm quite lucky in that I can be quite choosy about that. But I do want to work with people who I don't have to worry about ego or self-importance or anything like that. They are, if you like, normal individuals who are keen to get on in life and try and make a difference in their own way. And if I'm learning in that situation and they are learning in that situation, that would be a great outcome. I don't really care how big it is or how small it is, as long as it's interesting and I've got good people to work with.
CEO of the Living Leader, then.
Who knows? Who knows? Maybe one day I'll be that important that I could do that.
Why not? So just tell me, because I know that what people are wanting to do is take nuggets away, and you've shared a lot already, but if you knew that there's a few more nuggets that you could share that would really get people inspired to step away from just being managers, but to being leaders, what else might you suggest to them is key skills that they could, or anything that they could do to develop them even more?
Oh, difficult question. I mean, we haven't really talked about the importance of behavior in leadership, but in my experience, that is absolutely critical. And we've touched on it in terms of listening and asking people their opinion. I mean, that is all part of leadership behavior. So I think it's not even if you aspire to a leadership position, just in the way that you conduct yourself day to day, behavior is absolutely fundamental. The way you behave will be reflected in the way that people behave towards you. And that I think is worth thought as you go around your day-to-day life and develop your career. I mean, I've had it. I know that as a leader, and I've seen it, it's happened to me, a careless word or act by my boss, it can upset your whole year. You might wonder from that one comment where you're going in your career and whether you'll be able to fulfill your ambition in a particular company. So I think that puts a hell of a responsibility on the leader to be very conscious about how they behave the whole time. I mean, it is like being on stage the whole time. Everyone is watching you and seeing how you react to situations and how you conduct yourself. And if you get that wrong, you can destroy years of work around culture. So how you behave, even in moments of crisis, are so important. That ability to bring others with you, to draw them in, not to take accountability from them, to listen to them, to seek their opinion. It is always to be courteous and polite. Okay, you can get upset sometimes, you can get emotional sometimes, but be very measured and careful and considerate about how you do it. And I think that is one of the most important lessons in leadership. And it is worthy of further consideration. And I suppose if I was to give one bit of advice, that is what people should think about more as they go about their day-to-day life. And even if you're not in a formal leadership position, everyone you work with around you will notice how you behave. And if you set the tone, it will be infectious, I promise you.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think it applies, it doesn't matter where you are, what position you are in the company, it really doesn't make any difference. Being consciously aware, choosing how you want to be as a human being,
Yeah.
choosing how you want to inspire people, choosing how you want to, and then being able to live that. It's a hell of an ask of everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, and it can be exhausting. And you, I mean, people worry about being contrived. You talked a bit about authentic leadership. I mean, at the end of the day, people can see through someone if they're faking it, if they're, it's an act. You don't want it to be an act. You want to be you as you do it and comfortable doing it. And that, I accept, that is not always easy, but it is what I would encourage people to do. Everyone is a human. Everyone needs to sleep at night and get up in the morning and brush their teeth or whatever. Everyone is a human being. And if the more you divorce yourself from that, I think the more problem you will have as a leader.
How long did it take you to really begin to learn that, Chris?
Ooh, quite a long time, actually. I mean, the army was formative to me as a leader, and that's an interesting career to consider leadership. But when I joined OneTel, OneTel was a very, very different company. You didn't have titles, you didn't have offices. You all sat in a massive open plan offices. There were no org charts, there were no secretaries. So all the trappings of hierarchy had been removed. And that to me, I suppose, underlined to me where you're always in, everyone can see you the whole time. It started to make me understand the importance of leadership and leadership behavior. So it's a whole sequence of things that was formative for me. We sold OneTel, this wacky, fast-paced, energetic, different company, to Centrica, British Gas. And I remember walking into British Gas on day one, and I was given this office on the executive floor, the 7th floor. And my office was, it was as big as an Olympic swimming pool as far as I could see. And it had carpet that was about this thick, and it was completely silent. So it had all the barriers that a leadership hierarchy can put up around you. And that, accepting that as a leadership behavior, you can see how it gets in the way of communication and forming those relationships. When I left Centrica 15 years later, there was only one office in the whole company, and that was my boss's, who was a wonderful guy and I loved dearly, but he just couldn't give up his office. And as I started to remove all those trappings of hierarchy, there were people who were scared by it. They'd worked all their life towards a corner office or whatever. But the more you can expose leadership, the better the communication, the more you can see the behaviors of a leader. I think it puts the spotlight on the right things, and it will enhance the performance of the company. And so my understanding of the importance of leadership behavior, I mean, it's spread over many years. I joined British Gas Services next. I had 16,000 people working for me. And I remember I had a wonderful lady who ran sales and marketing. She was brilliant, and she has become a CEO in her own right since then. But I remember she came to me with a problem, and she talked about it at some length, 10 or 15 minutes. And I looked at her at the end and I said, so what do you want to do about it? And she told me what she wanted to do about it. And I said, fine, off you go, let's do that. And she came back to me about 5 weeks later and she said, do you know, Chris, that's the first time in my career in British Gas that someone has asked me my opinion and not just told me what to do. And I mean, that was quite a wake-up call for me. It reinforced to me how powerful listening and leadership behavior can be. So understanding that is something that took many years and many years of practice. And I saw extreme examples along the way, but all of it reinforced my belief over time in the importance of leadership behavior. How you conduct yourself is so important.
Yeah, and of course I've observed your behavior over years, which is why I sing your praises to everybody as one of the best leaders I know. However, I don't know if you can even remember this, if it's been important enough. You know, I've asked you to talk all about this, but nowhere have you shared the actual achievements that you got in the companies as a result of you bringing leadership in. Can you on any of them remember how much of a turnaround and how much actually a success as a result of it? Because you said numbers come last, but my God, you managed it every time.
Yeah, not quite every time, but most times. I suppose, I don't know. I've been lucky. You do need a degree of luck as a leader as well. And some of the companies I came into had not been loved, had not really been given the attention they warranted, and so gaining success wasn't easy, but it was easier than it might have been. And I talk about the importance of people, customers, and numbers. I mean, those are the three areas that I would look to measures of success for. So in people, what are things like engagement scores doing? What are accident rates doing? In customers, what are customer satisfaction doing? What are customer numbers doing? And in numbers, what are revenue and what's profit and cash flow doing? I would like to think that most of the companies that I have run, you saw positive movement in all of those. Some of it was quite dramatic. I mean, British Gas business, that one you mentioned the other earlier, I think we took revenue from, I don't know, 500 million to 1.5 billion in 3 years. I mean, it was both organic and mergers and acquisition. We got into the Financial Times Great Places to Work. We had, I don't know what it was, 12 quarters of improving customer satisfaction. And I'm very proud of those results. The team and the broader team, I don't know how many of us there were, 1,500 or so, did an absolutely fantastic job. So I think by leading in the right way and focusing on the right things, you can enjoy success. You do need a bit of luck as well, Penny, and I had a bit of luck along the way. So
yeah, I think to an extent though, Chris, you make your own luck, don't you?
yeah, maybe. I mean, I look at a Greco, my most recent one, and then the numbers were much harder to get right. The situation when I joined it was not easy. We had one division that was developing most of the profit out of 4 or 5 contracts, and the market had changed and they were never going to come back, and that created a hell of a headwind. We grew tremendously in the other division that made up for that loss, but it didn't allow you to show the top line revenue growth you wanted to. But we did the right things, and we still saw customer satisfaction improving. It became better than it ever was. We still saw engagement and health and safety statistics all doing the right things. And at the end of the day, I can look back on it and believe that we did the right thing, and I was very proud of what we achieved. But sometimes it doesn't always go in the right direction in all of the things you look at.
Yeah, how did you handle it when COVID hit and lockdown occurred?
Well, I spend a lot of time here, I tell you, in front of the screen. We as a team, very quickly put in place and communicated very broadly the priorities for the business. And the first priority that we put out there was protecting people's jobs. And so I stood up in front of the whole company on Teams or Zoom and said to them, that is my first priority, to not furlough anyone and not make anyone redundant. And the second priority was around cash flow and protecting our cash flow. I think the third was around customers. I can't remember what the fourth was about now. But I mean, that was extremely well received. And I would spend a lot of time on Zoom talking to people all over the world. I remember talking to someone, I think in Afghanistan, who was on one of our sites there, who was used to being mortared periodically. They'd been there for 9 months, and they said to me that one of the most motivational things they heard was when I stood up and said, we're going to protect your jobs. You had everyone pulling in the same direction, on the same side, feeling supported. And I'm very proud that at the end of COVID, we had lived up to that promise. No one was furloughed. No one was made redundant. Our balance sheet had strengthened, and we got growth coming back very quickly. It took a year or two, but it came back very, very quickly, very strongly. So, and it took an awful lot of communication, an awful lot of time in front of the screen, talking to people all over the world, telling them, being very open about what was going on. And I suppose, well, I know they found that extremely reassuring.
Yeah, you see, that's what I love, Chris, about you. That's another characteristic that's very, very strong in you, and that's integrity. You know, let's do what we can and do it the right way, and being open with people, telling them what the challenge is, telling what the problems are, and saying we are going through a tough time, not walking away from it, but saying this is what it is. And that's, again, I think, how you really, really build trust with people, knowing that whatever it is you say. So, Chris, I don't know that if I can do a summary, because I've been so fascinated. I've made no notes at all, absolutely none. But I think what more than anything I've heard from you is very much what I've said about being authentic, having the courage to continue whatever level you are in an organization. Choose who you want to be, and if you want to be a leader, hold on to it somehow. If at the end of the day it isn't possible, then you have a different choice to make. And to remember that people are going to always be watching you. They're going to make a decision about who you are based on your behaviors.
Yeah.
And if you start demonstrating behaviors that are not useful, people are not going to trust you and come and be open with you. So you're not going to get a similar response back again. So all the things that you talk about are things that I can put hand on heart and say I have observed in you, and when you've led. You haven't shared too many of the results you've got in too many of the companies, but I also know that certainly in the companies I've worked with you in, you've always achieved amazing results. I do remember that first one. It blew Jill Shedden's socks off. She was so excited to be part of it.
Yeah.
You know, she was your HR director at the time. And I always remember, actually, Jill telling me how you heard about me. If you remember, we got asked to take leadership across Centrica, and your division happened to be some of it. And they wouldn't listen to how I wanted to do it. They wanted to put this massive coaching package on the back. And I said, no, it's ridiculous. And they said none of the directors needed it. It was all people below. And you picked up, there was some change in behavior in your little company underneath, and said to Jill, what's happening? And Jill said, well, we're working with this woman, Penny Ferguson. And you said, I want to meet her. And I came, that was the first time I met you. And you said, this is unacceptable. You're teaching these people something, and we don't know what it is. Penny, I want you personally to come and run the program for the top team. And that was how we met.
Yeah. and it was happenstance. It was luck. And there were a lot of people vying to give leadership programs in British Gas at the time, and most of it, as far as I could see, was corporate bollocks, and it didn't interest me. And you were different, and you understood the importance of people, and about building that bond of trust and making them understand what accountability was. And well, I believe I was absolutely right, and I would point to the results, and it was borne out by the results. So I appreciate what you did, Penny.
Well, we did all right together, didn't we, Chris? And it's been a long time, a long journey, and
Yeah.
nothing could have given me greater pleasure that you're not now, you're not a client at the moment. Who knows? You might be again one day. Who knows? You might be working with us. But our journey together for me has been nothing but absolute pleasure. I have enjoyed every minute of it. I thank you so much for giving your time. I am going to say now that anybody here who's been listening to this or listens to it on record because you were too busy today, I really suggest that if you've got any questions for Chris, please send them in to us. Send them in to Katie or to me. We will forward them immediately to Chris. So if you've got any things that you think, God, I'd really like to ask Chris how he did this, but I didn't like to in the public forum, but I'd really like some thought here. Are you happy with that, Chris, if people do send in?
That is not a problem in the slightest. Very happy to help if I can.
So that would be amazing. So, Chris, I just want to say thank you again. It's been a real joy. And I'm sorry, guys, we're a little bit late, but I hope you've taken a lot from it. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Penny. All the best.
Bye.